We good, recording wise? We're good. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to call the meeting to order of the City of Monona Plan Commission, Monday, October 12th, 2020. Would you call the roll, Doug?
Chair Moore.
Here?
Alder Goforth.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Homburg.
Here.
Ms. Fowlett.
Here.
Ms. Fox.
Here.
Mr. Stein.
Here.
Mr. Holmquist.
Here.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from September 28th, 2020?
Move approval.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great. Are there any corrections, additions, changes to the minutes from the 28th? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes are approved. I'd like to move to number 5, unfinished. Do we have any appearances this evening?
No, nobody here at City Hall.
Okay. Then I'd like to move to number 5, unfinished business. A, public hearing on the request by Pelletary Waste Systems for approval of a zoning permit for site modifications at 2714 Industrial Drive, case number 2-011-2020. David, go ahead. You're up to present this evening. And you're on mute. Oh,
There you go. I thought Ken Kosick is actually representing us here, so I thought he was going to be speaking. I was just listening in.
okay.
But,
Well, if he's here, I'm not seeing him on my screen, but that doesn't.
Yeah, I don't
mean-
see him either. Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess I can.
Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I guess we've been working with city staff. You guys, it was before the committee about a month ago to do a parking lot improvement on a property on Industrial Drive. And we took the comments from that meeting and resubmitted the plan per the conversation we had. I believe that Veer Baker is our consultant on the project. So the board recommended that they use another architect to review the wastewater, or not the wastewater, the rainwater discharge ponds. So that should all be included in the packet.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to share with us tonight, David, before I close the public hearing?
Happy to answer any questions, I guess, moving forward.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Seeing no one else that I'm aware of, Doug, are you aware of anybody else who wanted to speak at the public hearing related to this issue?
No, nobody else to speak. We did notice again, as we did with the first round, and I don't see anyone else.
Okay.
Same again. I was expecting Ken Kosick. I had been emailing with him, but maybe if he jumps in, he can answer questions once it gets to the consideration, if he does join.
Okay, that being the case, we'll close the public hearing and go to number 5B, consideration of action on request by Pelletary Waste Systems for approval of a zoning permit for site modifications at 2714 Industrial Drive. It's number 2-011-2020. Doug, would you like to start us off?
Thank you. So as Mr. Pelletary mentioned, this came before the commission at the September 14th meeting at a more of a conceptual level. The plans and the packet that was provided is much more substantial this time around. The plans are for 15 additional parking stalls behind the existing building at 2714 Industrial Drive. And this is to allow for additional parking for Pelletary, connecting through to their existing operations that sort of span a couple different parcels there. Included with the application is landscaping, site lighting, as well as the stormwater management plan. And so I can just run through these. In terms of the landscaping, there was a lot more detail that was offered this time. Plantings are proposed along both the eastern and western boundaries of the parking area. In addition, the cottonwood tree, the existing tree on the northern end of the parking area is still to remain in place. Additionally, so the plan calls for 3 2-inch caliper trees, as well as extensive shrub plantings. The standards, the typical standards that you would have in attachment 2 for industrial parking areas, they can be waived by the Plan Commission, but the plans themselves are still subject to review. So it's really a discussion as to how well they're screening in terms of the height as well as the effectiveness of them from adjacent parcels. Additionally, the site lighting, the applicant proposes 4 30-foot tall light poles, each rated for 70 watts and 9,600 lumens. There was a photometric plan included, which shows a maximum illumination of 2.1 foot candles with an average just over 1. The engineering was reviewed by Strand Associates. This time around, they reviewed the stormwater management plan. There were very few comments, just 2 that came back. I included their summary email of what was reviewed first time around. A couple comments were both addressed. It was more to do with the modeling and sort of back and forth between the engineering groups, but they came to a resolution and those were both addressed. I will say that as part of the staff comment and staff review, Brad Brune of the city, he handles both erosion control and stormwater management permits. Both of those will need to be addressed and finalized. He had a few comments that we've already been going back and forth with Strand and most likely will circulate with the applicant's engineer shortly to address those. Additionally, the city's interim fire chief at the time that this was circulated recommended a Knox box for the property as there's not one currently in place. That being said, staff recommendation is for approval with the conditions, the 4 conditions as stated in the staff report. That includes the 4th condition, which has both erosion control and stormwater management permit applications to be worked through with both the city's consulting engineer and staff, with that being Brad Brune. I have his comments that were shared a little after the staff report went out. I can run through those if we wanted to get into that detail. But they were more sort of specific items, punch list type items. I confirmed with him nothing specifically that he saw that would sort of be a critical issue, more things that could sort of be addressed back and forth between the 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Chris, would you like to start us off?
Sure. First, appreciate the applicant addressing all the concerns that were raised last time. I think it's a nice set of plans. It's well done. The only question I would have would be more for when Rob talks, if he thinks it's a decent job on the screening. One thing for me I'd like to see would be one tree that gets taller than 15, 20 feet somewhere. The logical place be over on the west side where there's a lot of room and it only overhang the driveway and not the vehicles. But again, it's really up to the rest of the commission and how they feel. I think they've done a nice job of screening. They've done a nice job with the setbacks. The water quality looks good. I have no other concerns. Thanks.
Thank you. Rob?
In general, I think it looks good. I had one comment on the lighting plan. I noticed some discrepancy between the details. It shows it as a 20-foot light pole on a 3-foot base. So I don't know, that could potentially be a 33-foot light, or it could be a 20-foot light. I'm not sure, but they might want to clarify or get that figured out. I don't know if the photometrics considered the 3-foot base. As far as the landscaping goes, I think it will do an adequate job of screening. It's kind of a disorganized planting plan. It's pretty naturalized, I would say. You won't have a lot of understory screening with the trees that are proposed. And it doesn't say whether those are single or multi-stem. You can get those in either. If they're multi-stem, you'll get more of a screen. I realize it's back in the corner where I don't know how much is needed necessarily, but that's one thing to look at. I noticed as well that there's no any taller specimen. The lilac tree will only get about 25 feet in good conditions. Not super long lived typically. It's used a lot in street trees, and they look beat up oftentimes after 10 years. But as far as selections, I think that's fine. It's a good mix. So other than that, I don't have anything else, I don't think.
Great, thank you. Josh?
Nothing to add. The
Nothing.
plans look comprehensive. They look good to me. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Corinne?
Nothing to add on my end either.
Okay, great. Chrissy?
Yeah, I think the plans look really good. I'm glad to hear your business neighbors are in support, and I have nothing else to add.
Susan?
Nothing to add either. In fact, the only comment I thought we had before was from Rundle Spence next door worrying about runoff, and I assume that has been taken care of with these extensive groundwater plans. Right. So other than that, no, nothing to add. Looks good.
Brian?
No additional comments. Looks good.
Okay. All those having spoken, do I have a motion? Chris?
I'd just like to know if there's any consensus or any other opinions about having one tree that gets larger and lives a little longer on likely the west side of that property where there's a lot of room, if that seems to be something we should look at or if we let it go.
Comments from the rest of the committee? Anybody? Stick your hand up if you want to be recognized. Rob, do you have anything to say about that?
Just to add one other thing is, David, you might want to consider that. And I know we like to have bigger trees, but that's on a slope already. And it's specified as a 2-inch caliper. And that's a big root ball, and you're already planting it on a narrow slope. If it were me, it's not a street tree. You have a little flexibility. I would specify a 1.5 inch or smaller. And then ideally, I think you'd be happier with a taller, more specimen type tree, but.
Anybody else? To Chris's comment, anybody else want to weigh in?
I guess I would just say that I think the variety would be nice. I don't have a problem with it. I think personally I'd prefer variety.
Okay. Anybody else?
I guess I'm comfortable leaving it, the comments that have been made to the applicant to think about and decide.
Okay.
Wants to add a bigger tree. Yeah.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Last call. All right, do I have a motion? Chris?
Move approval of conditions 1 through 3 as written by staff. Condition 4, that the erosion control and stormwater management permit applications shall be submitted to city staff. That would be the change from the consulting engineer for review and approval prior to granting building permits.
Okay, great. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I've got a second from Josh. Yeah, Chris.
The reason I changed that, Rob, is the applicant always submits for approval to us. We use our consulting engineer that makes the recommendation back to us, but we ultimately have the final approval over the plan. So it'd be the same way with that condition. Just so we're clear that it includes our consultants, but they're a consultant to us.
Got it. Okay, so I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries. David, congratulations.
You,
We look forward to seeing your handiwork.
All right, thank you.
Good luck.
Yeah,
Have a nice night, everybody.
Yeah, you too. You too. Okay, let's move on to number 6A, discussion of possible recommendation to the Monona City Council on the request by the Monona East Side Business Alliance for increased flexibility from regulations for Monona restaurants to adapt to the challenges posed by COVID-19. Devin,
Yes, ma'am.
bring it. What do you got? What do you got to share with us this evening?
Okay. So thank you guys very much for having me tonight. I really appreciate getting the chance to chat with all of you. I will say, sort of before I go into some of the ideas, that if the committee overall feels like these aren't great ideas, I am certainly open to other suggestions. When I took this job about 7 months ago, none of the questions pertain to how do you feel about managing things during a global pandemic. So this has been a learning experience, and I've got these ideas, but if they don't work or they're not feasible, I'm certainly open to others. So basically, where we're at with this is the county right now is in phase 2 technically, but it's really more of a 1.5. They did not want to scale back due to pretty much just optics. But if you go to the public health page for Dane County and Madison, you can see the numbers there. They've continued to trend upward with a spike coming in the early part of September, and it's continued to rise substantially from there. They will not lessen any of the restrictions or go back anywhere until they hit 14 days consecutively of a downward trend, which right now we're on day 0. That being the case, all of the restaurants and bars and retail spaces within Dane County are still restricted to 25% indoor capacity. And the workaround, that was sort of pushed during the summer months was to allow for, especially for area restaurants, to utilize patio seating to expand out into their parking lots for additional seating, but to basically let them kind of get beyond that 25% capacity. In the coming months, of course, they're going to lose that. They can't do outdoor seating when it's snowing outside or if it's 0 degrees. So the ideas that we have come up with at MESVA, and we've sort of made some modifications on these since the original conversation. But the first one would be to allow. Thanks. The first one would be to allow for the allowance of enclosed tents with heating elements for outdoor seating. So that there's a device called an igloo, which not that igloo, but a more manufactured one that a lot of restaurants are using. The city of Chicago is purchasing them for a lot of different restaurants there. I know there's a restaurant in Spring Green that just bought one here, so a little bit local. But basically, it is a enclosed dome that come in various sizes. And they have a heating element on the center of it, and then of course the ventilation is through the top, so people aren't breathing that in. But it allows for outdoor seating in an enclosed environment that serving staff can sort of exit in and out of pretty easily. So you would still have the same rules regarding people are moving around; they're still wearing masks, but they can stay seated without the mask, eat their food, or stay seated there, and then they still get that additional seating. So I know that's something that would have to involve inspection by the either health department or fire department, but that's certainly one idea to consider for enclosed tents that have heating elements. The second idea was for usage of street parking, but that one is a little bit less feasible. So sort of modification, and Alder Goforth and I had a chance to chat about this earlier today. One of the ideas is to allow for perhaps moving some of the handicap spots and dedicating those towards delivery drivers. So whether that's Grubhub or DoorDash or any of those, to increase their traffic on that, or to allow them to create basically lanes set up in front of their buildings so that the drivers can pull up very quickly, get food, and then move on. On that note, I know this doesn't exactly pertain to the committee, but I am working with some of those area delivery services and looking to get, maybe one night a week where they waive some of the delivery fees. I know for some of those, I'm sure we've all experienced at this point, a $30 meal becomes a $60 meal when you get all the fees and things tagged onto that I understand they have to make money, but if there's a way that they can allow maybe one day a week or 2 days a month, something like that, to waive those, then that may help them and help the area restaurants as well. And then on top of that, the last idea that I had kind of come up with was the for those with a sufficient parking lot size that would be limited to those particular restaurants, but the ability to create makeshift drive-throughs. So if they can set up a tent, they've got a space heater there, they've got some of their staff that's out there with the orders. That way people can pull up, they never have to get out of their car. You've got a little less contact delivery, not completely contactless, but they can pull up to their car, roll down the window, they hand the food through, and then the people drive off. So those are the ideas that we're sitting on, but basically the end goal is to find workarounds from that 25%. The latest report that I'm hearing from the tourism department is that it's expected that 40% of the state's population of restaurants will probably close during the winter months. In Dane County, it's a little bit less, but it's still predicted to be about 30%. So we're still looking at possibly losing some restaurants. So anything we can do to mitigate that or stave that off as long as possible or just avoid it altogether, I'm all about. I don't want to see empty storefronts in Monona. I know none of you do either. So just looking for any solutions, anything that we can do to help these restaurant owners out.
Right.
And that is all I've got.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Devin or even suggestions? Since this is an open discussion, this isn't an action item per se, it's just bringing us up to speed on these ideas. Any thoughts? Yeah, Chris.
Well, for all the comments, number one, I think it's a simple way to calculate how much extra parking lot you have. If they've got you down to 25% capacity, you wouldn't have 75% excess parking lot because you have some staff and things that remains maybe not consistent, but there's always a base level of staff. So I think for Doug or someone to say how much parking lot do we have excess, I don't think it's that hard to figure that out. And as far as the end date, right now, I see the city council set an end date of November 15th. I think the end date is when the standards change, when they can start getting 50% in the restaurant, then that changes the amount of parking lot that's available. But until then, it's pretty simple that there's a lot of parking lot available to be creative with. As far as the question about moving ADA stalls, that is a federal regulation. Subject to lawsuit. I would not recommend you do it, but the only way it gets proven out is when somebody sues, because the way the law reads, you have to have the most reasonably close area to the front door. Reasonable. Right. Nobody knows what that means. So I think if you started taking those and moving them out for a delivery car, I think you'd run into some ADA issues. So I would not recommend that. The expiration date, like I said, I would piggyback with whatever county health standards are.
Well, so that was what I was going to say. My understanding is that that's not when those restrictions expire. It's when the ordinance expires that allowed them to do the outdoor seating.
Correct. And I think, if I was going to give a recommendation to the council, it would be that we piggyback with the health orders versus an arbitrary date. If they keep the 25% restriction on until January or February, then staff or plan commission, whichever the case is, should be allowed to keep that extra use of the parking lot or whatever creative things we can come up with. And I think that would be a combination of when Doug says, yeah, this is a no-brainer, we'll readjust this, great. And like always, if Doug has a question, bring it back to plan commission. Say, here's what you're thinking. I'm not sure about it. What do you think? And that's why we've handled some unusual permit requests in the past.
Sure. So that's those ordinances are set to expire on November 15th, but the restrictions won't change until they have 14 days of consecutive downward spiking numbers.
Right, which we don't know when that is.
Right. That could be, next month. It could be next year. We don't know.
So right. I think we need to be.
Yeah, and certainly in fairness to the council, the November 15th date was considered to be very generous at that point when we set it, because we thought we were going to be through this, and frankly, it was even longer than the city of Madison had passed at that point, and obviously that's not the case. So I'm certainly not anticipating that it would be an issue, and we've certainly. To go back to your initial point, Devin, I mean, Schnick's immediate comes to mind that already has the walls up and has, you know, I mean, I don't know that it's exactly the igloo that you're talking about, but certainly it's more enclosed than a lot of the other establishments that have already requested, you know, permits from us to extend into the parking lot, build more outdoor space. So,
What place did you say, Nancy?
Sports, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Any
other comments for, I saw several hands up a minute ago besides Chris.
Well,
Susan.
I would certainly agree with changing the date. I mean, I think that kind of goes without saying, and
yeah,
either just move it out or rephrase it to talk about the numbers. I think any and all of these that will work sound good to me. I would agree with Chris that changing the ADA, that doesn't sound okay to me, but whatever creative solutions you can find, I think makes sense. You know, I think off Broadway with its tent, I don't know if they have plans to enclose it, but that's been great during this season, just as an example of good use of parking lot space when there are options to park on the street, which there are there. So, yeah, I think.
So off Broadway is Madison,
yeah,
right?
I know that. But
so
yeah.
Madison has already issued some rules, but in my conversations, we do have some Madison members. In my conversations with them, some of the restaurant owners have felt that those rules are a little bit too cumbersome. So they are allowing for enclosed tents and things like that, but they basically have to be much further away than the patio seating has been in parking lots. So it basically eats into the majority of their parking spaces. So it really doesn't do them much good. So that's been part of the challenge with them. So if extending out the ordinance that the City Council for Monona originally passed is a possible solution, it would still need to be built upon, because all that ordinance allows right now, my understanding anyway, is that would just allow patio seating, which of course in January won't do it.
Right. Anybody else? Christy?
Yeah. First, I want to applaud your advocacy efforts. And thank you for going to bat for our local businesses. That's definitely important. I do want to clarify that I wasn't recommending that we take over the handicap spaces. The suggestion of the street parking,
Sure.
what was the thoughts were parking on Monona Drive so drivers could run in. And I realized that was not going to work as a county highway. And so I was just spitballing some ideas out and thinking if we can just get you near the door, because those parking lots are large and anyways, so I do realize that. I think, I'm fully in support of extending this and in being creative. I'm wondering, you're not looking to extend the hours beyond 9 p.m. Or anything like that, is that correct?
That has not come up in conversation with any of our members at this point or any of the area restaurants. I think at this point, most of them would probably not be interested, given that it's costing them so much to stay open as it is, and they don't have the business to justify it. So unless they can look to increase their overall numbers, at which point they may request that. But I think at this point that's not anything anybody's asking for.
Okay. And then the igloos, have you seen the ones that Robinia Courtyard uses?
I have not, no.
Okay.
The only one I saw the ones in Chicago that are similar to the one that's being used in Spring Green, but I've not seen Robinia Courtyard.
Okay. Those are very cool, and seems like it could be a way to, we're all so socially deprived right now. It's one way to kind of make this situation a little bit positive and interesting, and having something like that. I would be in support of that. I think it's really important that we work with our local businesses, our local restaurants, to make sure they stay in business. So, yeah.
Maureen, did you have something?
Yeah, when you said that, I looked up a picture of these igloos. I mean, they're cool. The ones that I'm seeing on the web are like one per table, but then you're talking about the enclosed tents as well. And I guess, the reason that there's limited capacity is so that the airborne transmission, I guess, is reduced. So if you're proposing a tent that has multiple tables and then you're enclosing it, isn't that the same as having an indoor space?
Well, so some of the ones that I've seen do have the ventilation systems, so that you're, it's not just everybody breathing the same air like you're on a bus with everyone. But it is, they come in different sizes. So you would be limited, of course, in terms of how many tables or how many people you can get in there. But that would allow for additional seating, and then you would still have to space those tables by the health department standards of the 6 feet apart.
Okay.
So however many you can get into the igloos that you purchase, however many that may be, then that would be the capacity that you were limited to.
Okay. Do you know how expensive these things are too? Because it seems like there's not a lot of discretionary income,
Sure.
especially after doing a lot of patio investment this summer.
Yeah. So they range in price, of course, based on manufacturer and on size. There are, however, a number of different companies that are offering grants currently, and organizations that are offering grants to restaurant owners to make those purchases in some of the northern states because they're so dependent on those for their survival.
Okay.
Right?
Um,
Anybody else? Oh, sorry.
yeah, I had one more comment. I really like the idea to do the makeshift drive-through as well. So however that would work, maybe it's not a drive-through, but the makeshift drive
Sure.
pickup thing, that I think is a great idea. The city hall, or not the city hall, the community center, they did something like that now. They have a walk-up window that,
Right.
I think that is a good solution too.
So for some of the buildings that have that ability, they can just do it through a window. Of course, that would make it much easier. But if they don't have that, my thinking was the possibility of setting up a tent close to their entrance or somewhere in the parking lot where the drivers can still kind of pull through there and not interfere with foot traffic and get their food and then go, and then still bringing in the business to the restaurants, but limiting the contact between the different people.
Yeah.
Susan?
Well, I thought Buck and Honey's, I mean, they still have that pickup where you, the parking spaces with the stalls.
Sure.
I mean, that's worked great because you just call, they run out. I mean, they'd have to throw their park on, I guess, in the winter, but I would think something like that can still work without doing a whole drive-through thing. If you just even have 1 or 2 stalls where people could
Sure.
pull up, and they can drop it off. I mean, that's really been easy, especially if you can pop your trunk up, they can just stick it right in there and there's no contact. Yeah.
Great. Anybody else? Okay. Devin, thanks for, Chris?
Yeah, one comment, I gave it some more thought while you all were talking, and the ADA thing, if we have restaurants that have multiple ADA stalls and we're now down to 25% capacity, so we're down on our parking stalls, that would allow, perhaps you could argue that one of those stalls could be taken for the Uber driver or whatever for pickups, because since you now are required fewer parking stalls, you may be required only 1 ADA stall versus the 2 or 3. So that could be a possibility for a temporary takeover. The other thing is, I mean, we just need to acknowledge that we would never allow these type of temporary structures to be up long-term in a parking lot, except for the pandemic. And that's what we're really talking about, is because of the pandemic, we're asking the city council to allow us and staff to allow these temporary structures and work it in coordination with the timeline from Dane County Health.
Yeah, and of course, and I as far as the ADA, and again, that was just Alder Goforth and I just kind of spitballing it. That was not a flushed out idea, but that was one that if that's needed to reach out to the county office or whoever's sort of issuing those the placards, then that's certainly a conversation I can have with them to try to get a little more information. But that's a very good thought, based on the number of spots that they have available and the capacity that they're limited to.
So Corinne just made a reference in the chat room that suggested that maybe, in case you didn't see it, Devin, that maybe MESBA could, get behind some of the restaurants by suggesting that, their favorite patrons or, support the restaurant by helping fund the igloo. So, if you're a huge fan of restaurant
crowdfunding, crowdfunding, exactly.
So that's just another thing. That's a great idea, Corinne. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, that is a great idea.
Anything else from this group before we close this discussion and move on to the next? Devin, thank you. Oh, Brian.
Yeah, my only point was, I know it was just mentioned in passing, the street parking issue. Like that's a piece that I'm not in support of, particularly on the drive. Even for example, although I think there might be some mixed opinions about the lane closure up by Obrick, there are pieces of that that are very concerning at different times of the day.
Sure.
That it actually puts more people at risk in that area. And I wouldn't want to see anything like that on the drive.
When we were first kind of chatting about the idea, the consideration was that we kind of restrict that to maybe like a 6 p.m. to a 9 p.m. kind of thing, or 6 to 8. But in my conversation with Christy, I did not know that that's actually a county road. So that would be a much larger issue. So that idea very much got backburnered. That's where we sort of transitioned to the drive-through lane, or the takeout lane for the Uber drivers, or the designated parking spots.
Thanks.
I'll just throw one other thing out. I'm very much in support of finding creative solutions to this problem, but when we think about temporary structures, tents and stuff, and we move into winter, they have to be constructed in a way and maintained in a way that they can withstand the snow load. So, as we think about this, that's something that the city council should consider.
And the igloos are specifically designed for that. They are designed to be able to handle outdoor weather in the winter. So certainly a necessary consideration, but I think they kind of are built for that specific reason.
Using them in Minneapolis, I saw. So yeah, if they can stand there, they can stand here probably. But
probably.
Great, but good point, Josh. We'll make sure that that's included when it gets to council. Anything else on this issue? Chris?
It's noticed as discussion and possible recommendation. Is our discussion then the recommendation? We don't need to make a motion or anything?
So Doug, since you wrote it up this way, were you looking for a specific recommendation from this committee as opposed to a specific call to action?
I'm not sure that there needs to be a specific call. It was put there as an option. In speaking with City Administrator Gatto, I think he thought this was a good platform for kind of the discussion. And I think having two alders here, as this ordinance moves closer to expiring, then I think that it can be brought forward to council with this discussion. I think there's kind of a wide range of comments and discussion that took place that could be brought to council from here, unless someone feels. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarifying. All right, great. Thanks, Devin. Thanks for bringing it up. We're definitely 120% supportive of whatever we can do with the businesses here to keep them going. So appreciate you bringing it to our attention.
Well, thank you guys again for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right. Ken, so who's been patiently sitting, I believe, in the corner here. We have already addressed Pelletari's consideration of action this evening prior to coming on the call. Can you reach him by any chance, Doug?
Yeah, I think I muted him. There was some background noise coming. I asked to unmute, but I think he may just be sort of passively on the call at this point. I'm not sure he's.
Okay.
I thought he came on while we were still talking about that, so he may be aware of it.
I think yes.
Okay. All right, great. I just want to make sure that he wasn't hanging unnecessarily thinking we were going in a different direction. It seemed like he came in around the time that we started with Devin. So that being the case, number 6B, discussion of potential additions or revisions to the city ordinances regarding bicycle parking and electric vehicle charging standards.
Thank you. So I can definitely just give a very brief intro before I pass it over to Elisa. This is, just the first discussion of what I suspect will be, a much larger discussion. But just wanted to bring this forward. This sort of pertains to the broader concept of green zoning. A couple transportation-based options here, both the bike parking and the EV. This is something that Elisa has done a lot of research on. Possible ordinances, what sort of adjacent communities are doing, as well as best practice across the country. So with that, I've asked her to sort of introduce her work and give an overview before opening it to discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, so I can go into a little bit more detail about the reports that we included in the packet. Yeah, this came up, I mean, partially because I find this stuff interesting, but also because earlier this year, I helped write both our annual Green Tier Legacy Communities annual report, and also we reapplied for our Bike Friendly Communities membership and award. And so both of those applications include pieces about green zoning and specifically about bike and EV infrastructure. So it's sort of another factor that came into why I wanted to look into this stuff. So there's a lot of information in both reports, and I won't go into all of the details right now, but just to give you an overview, like Doug said, there are, specifically with bike parking, quite a few of our neighboring communities have bike parking ordinances. So I definitely tried to pull from their requirements, especially given our proximity to Madison and some of the other Madison area places. It seems like it makes sense to have some continuity in some of our availability of bike infrastructure. So both bike parking and EV, EV charging stations, they tie into quite a few of the city's plans. They're mentioned in the comprehensive plan, the sustainability plan, and then additionally the bike and pedestrian transportation plan from 2019. So I can jump into bike parking first, since that's the first one in the report. I tried to organize these reports so that they go through some of the pieces that an ordinance might have, and I will be really interested to hear what the commission members think might be good additions. I tried to add the sections that I thought might be relevant to what we potentially would include. So for bike parking, I sort of think of it in two parts. There's the parking minimums, like how many spaces to include per land use or for each land use, and then the stall requirements. So luckily bike parking is a lot more robust. There, a lot of cities have it. So there are pretty good national standards for bike parking design requirements. The ones that I've referenced here are from the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals. And I referenced those because several of our neighbors have similar standards, and they're the standards that are referenced in the Bike Friendly Communities application. So they're just sort of already tied into some things that we're a part of. And overall, those requirements require about a 2-by-6 foot space for each bike. The rack, I think the most typical design that you could think of is like the inverted U rack, because it provides 2 points of contact for a bike's frame, and is compatible with several different types of bike locks. Then it gets a little more, I guess, customizable to Monona in terms of how many bike parking spaces we might want to include for which type of land use. The table that I included in the staff recommendations section, I tried to include a range based on what other municipalities in our area have done. So for the most part, you'll see two different numbers, sort of a low end and a high end. And I think it would be a good place for discussion to decide how many we think might be a good choice for our land uses. I think for both bike parking and for EV charging, these requirements would obviously be triggered for new development, but I would be really interested to hear what the commission thinks about what other cases we might want to require these standards to kick in. You know, maybe not for every zoning permit, but you know, if a lot is being redeveloped or if there's being a lot of changes to the parking surface, you know, that's something that we could decide to do. There are lots of different, I included example ordinances, a lot of the ones that I chose from. And I think looking at some of the requirements from like Fitchburg's is really nice. And then Eau Claire as well has a good example. I think they're more similar to what Monona might include as opposed to Madison, which has very, very extensive requirements. So then in terms of electric vehicle charging, this is definitely, it's a bit of a more forward thinking ordinance change if we decided to do this. I think bike parking is becoming a lot more commonplace, but EV charging is a little bit more forward thinking. So in that respect, I think there aren't quite as established like national standards for design. And so I've included some pieces of what might be considered design standards, but I think it might make sense for us to hold back a little bit on some of those for now. But the biggest pieces I think are zoning. Most places include EV charging stations as an accessory use in pretty much all zoning districts, and then will vary in terms of how many spaces they actually require. So in the staff recommendations, Doug and I went back and forth on this, but some big cities require lots of EV charging stations. And I think for us, it makes most sense to have them in places where people spend longer periods of time. So multifamily, residential buildings, office spaces, something like WPS, or some retail locations. So I think the riverfront is a good example of a development that you know, if we were to get another development like that in Monona, it would make sense to potentially require them to have 1 or 2 EV stalls in a place where people are living and also where there's retail. There are lots of other smaller considerations that we can talk about, and I'm happy to answer questions, but I guess I'll leave it to you all for discussion now.
So you brought up, I mean, a development obviously that comes to mind for me. Are there EV stations at the riverfront in the actual apartment building?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
I'm actually, yeah, because while we didn't require it, I'm actually kind of surprised at this day and age that a developer wouldn't do it anyway, because, you know, with the number of charging cars, it's just kind of surprising that it wouldn't, any more than putting a bike rack in the base, which I know they do have a bike rack in the, you know, in the garage. It just seems kind of like, so feedback on these two from Alyssa. Thank you very much for this work, Alyssa. This is very helpful. Any feedback as it relates to these two? Why don't we start with the bike racks? Comments, Corinne?
Yeah, I thank you for the work on these. This was really interesting to read about and think about. I had a couple questions and then maybe just a comment. The first question, has the city ever done an analysis of where there is bike parking already? That would be kind of interesting to see what kinds of businesses are already using bike parking racks, and then if we just even did an informal outreach to them to find out how often they're used, or, you know, if there's something that people are using, because that, if we did want to go into a place where we're doing an ordinance, it would be helpful to find out how these are already being used. And then I had a question, Christy, wasn't there the owner of the property where the medicine shop and confectionique, and you had helped consult, and then they had said they didn't want to. Is there a specific reason that they? Oh, okay.
So that's why I was like cheering up and down when I saw this come through. Because yeah, it's one of those things, if you don't require it, they probably won't do it.
Okay. I mean, I have no idea how expensive this is, so I guess that would be something interesting to have a sense for. If we were going to adopt an ordinance, it would be good to know how much we're asking our businesses or, the developments to spend to do this. But then the other thought I had was just something to include if we were going to do this, just to consider lighting, if we want to have any kind of lighting, depending on where the rocks are, if they're like a longer term or bigger, or I'm not sure, but that would be something that would be helpful, I think.
Right. Mother, Chris?
Well, for starters, we do require bike racks on almost all major redevelopments. It's very standard. The one that we probably missed the ball on was it Confectionique? Is that the name?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We didn't miss the ball. We talked about it and said, well, let's work with them and see if we can find a spot. And the thing is, Confectionique isn't the kind of place where you're going to ride your bike and put one of their pieces in your backpack and ride off. You almost always are going to use a car in that situation. So we have a performance zoning ordinance, and we've been enforcing our bicycle parking in that same way performance, because their next door neighbor, medicine shop, absolutely is a place somebody will bike to pick up their prescription. And a lot of people in that area use it. So I would look at the medicine shop a little differently than I would look at Confectionique, right in the same building. But I would say the medicine shop is absolutely, we left Confectionique and let's work with them to do something. The applicant wanted to do it, everybody wanted to do it. But, when I made the motion, let's be honest, I should have just required it, because the owner there is a very independent person. How's that? And doesn't like us to tell them what they should be doing on their property. And I knew that. And in most cases, Corinne, almost all cases that I can think of, and Brian, you've been around for a long time now, we require bicycle parking, and we look at it, we want it to be convenient. Now, something we could codify and that we haven't would be the size, the recommended size of the stalls. I don't think that's in our ordinance. And if we come up with a real good system for that, that's great. As far as saying, well, you got to have this kind of a bike, what do you call it, holster, or whatever it's going to be, the rack for parking. I think we need to leave some flexibility there. We need to let people have individual choices, just like they do for what their building's going to look like, as long as it is reasonable. But that's where, with performance zoning, we have a lot of flexibility to enforce what we want. I'll give you a story about performance zoning, which a burr under my saddle, is our quarry on Milwaukee Street in the city of Madison. It's about, I don't know, 54 acres, our shop burned down. And I had to go through about a year getting permits to be able to rebuild the shop on the same spot. At the very end, oh, we can't approve it yet. You don't have bike parking. The alder, who's terribly involved in Madison, I mean, they guide everything, says, what's he going to do? Ride there and put some rocks in a backpack and ride away? It's don't care, it's our ordinance. You got to have bike parking. So even the alder was against it, but that's in their ordinance. So that's where at least I get a little bit jittery when we say it will absolutely be this for each use, because there's so many different nuances to what each use might need for bike parking. Where we get ourselves in trouble then is when we approve a use and say, okay, Confectionique, you don't need a lot of bike parking, so we'll just require this. And then when somebody else goes in there and is a medicine shop and they need more bike parking, it's like, well, where's our authority now to change the bike parking? So you can see where I'm going with this. It's a juggling act, but to allow us maximum flexibility on what we see in a project, I think is important. Like you say, for apartments, you need a lot of bike parking in apartments anymore. And I quite honestly, I think the current two did a good job of that. So that's what I can remember now from what I have marked up from bikes. Let me just peek quick. Well, Nancy, you'll let me back in if I see something else I have marked up, won't you?
I absolutely will. And just for the record, when I was redoing my house, I rode my bike multiple times to Madison Block and Stone.
Seriously?
And it wasn't because I was planning on putting stones in the back of my bike. It was because I couldn't make up my mind, and I knew I was going to be going to look a lot. So, so
I
somebody
had
could
one.
easily say, why would you need a bike at Madison Block and Stone? Everything's heavy there, but
Yeah,
it worked for me.
we fell by about 20-ton loads where we're at. But I had an employee that tried it once. He biked in. He was so tired at the end of the day. He says the hardest thing I ever did was riding that bike home.
I was gonna say, with the cargo bikes, though, it's amazing what you can haul in those cargo bikes. I saw a photo of someone hauling a dishwasher on a cargo bike.
It is. My point wasn't so much that it would never happen, was that 54 acres and one bike stall is probably adequate, one or two. And I did have to put bike stalls in, and I don't know how many years since it burned down. It's got to be 10, 12, 15 years, and it's been used once. So that's okay.
Rob, did you have something you're going to chime in on?
This is great work, I have to say. It's very comprehensive, and you lay it out really well. And I'm certainly in support of building bike infrastructure, especially on those new developments. I like Chris. I get a little. I just want to be careful about what we require at some certain properties, some smaller properties, and making certain sites required to have these bike parking isn't always the case. And we can all find examples of bike parking that was required and isn't used. I used to work pre-pandemic in a building 3 stories with, 300 people. And there's a line of bike parking that was certainly required by the city of Madison. And I've literally seen one bike on it. And that's not to say we shouldn't. I'm not saying that I'm against some sort of ordinance change, and especially I would just focus maybe more of those requirements on the new development, and then those large scale redevelopments, kind of as you laid out. I would be in support of that. And as far as the standards, I would just ask that we don't follow Madison's, because it is it's ridiculous. Way over the top. So I've gone round and round with plans on bike parking and meeting all the 50 requirements they have to park a bike.
Okay, great. Christy?
Yeah, I love your work on this. Yes, I was so excited to see this, and I'm sorry that I overlooked that you had the APBP document in there, and I sent that your way, and I missed that you had already had that. So thanks for including that. A couple thoughts. I think about when I used to work at Water Tower Place, and I would ride my bike in, and there was nowhere to park my bicycle. And other than a very small, probably like a 3-inch caliper tree, and I just wasn't going to do it. And I have a nice bicycle too. So I would have to haul it in up to the 3rd floor, on the elevator. It was a huge pain. And so I think on something like that, when you have potentially over 100 people working in a building, that would make sense to have a rack there, to have that option. There's also a lot of therapists in there, so a lot of people coming and going. There were always bikes parked to that tree or along the railing. So I think maybe that could be a consideration, is how office buildings that have a lot of people there. And then I think another unique thing about our community is we have this lake loop, and so we have this route going through our city with huge amounts of traffic, which is why like Confectionique would make a lot of sense. And so maybe we even have a consideration like, are you on the lake loop? And maybe that'd be something where we would encourage a business to have parking. I mean, they just have to realize it's going to be good for them. It's going to bring people out, and bike supporters or bicyclists will support those businesses, because really most cyclists are just content with decent parking. And I think that's one of the things we have to consider is, are we going to make this decision to just go with decent parking, or are we going to kind of really go for it and, have it be a little, above par? I would say, I think maybe like 2 rack options is probably a good idea. There's a lot of bad racks out there. And so I think, having maybe just 2 options for people, so people do feel they have an option. People love options, but not letting them choose choose poorly. We don't want them to choose poorly. I also like the idea of, okay, Chris, hold on to your chair. Adding bike parking to offset the requirements for automobile parking. I'm a fan of that personally, because automobile parking it's very space intensive, it's very costly. And so I feel like this is a win-win for developers and a win for cyclists. So I would be in favor of that. And then I think, like Corrine said with the lighting, is, it's just a matter of, are we in short-term parking, long-term parking, and what are the uses? So if it's a restaurant or a bar at night, yeah, that would need to be in a well-lit area, those types of considerations. But yeah, I'm really excited about seeing this move through. Thanks again for your.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks for the report here. I think the key takeaway for me was around really the potential of us adding in some recommendations of how we, when we do talk about bike parking and access around redevelopment and development, we might have a better sense of how to include, rather than the more generic term of like, make sure there's a bike rack. We could get a little bit more specific in terms of the amount based on some other factor, either square footage or parking stalls or some other piece of it. What I want to make sure that we're thoughtful through is what would potentially trigger the discussion around bike parking. And I don't think change of use is necessarily the piece. So if you have business A that's in a building and business B moves in, to trigger it to add in something and shoehorn it into that spot when it may not fit doesn't make the most sense. But when you're talking about a whole development or a redevelopment, that's when you have the opportunity to make sure that it's designed well, in a good location, and not just put up to be put up. Rob had a good point when we were discussing a recent applicant up by the strip mall by the bank. And, we were talking about, boy, we should have another bike rack in here. And to clearly point out, there's one right at the other end of the building, in a very accessible area. And the utilization of that is fairly low. So I appreciate the work that went into this. I think it can help us as we're making those pieces and connecting them to future development and redevelopment. And I'll leave it there.
Josh, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I guess just a question back to Chris. Chris, you said we do have performance. What was the term you used? Performance what?
Standards. All our zoning standards are performance standards. We have very little prescriptive standards in our ordinance. We have parking stall size and a few things, but we're very much a performance standard, which allows the Plan Commission maximum flexibility on looking at a project for what it is versus trying to put it in one of 5 or 8 boxes.
Yeah, right. So, is there a way to enhance those performance standards so that something like this isn't missed? Not suggesting that we do miss often, but
I think that's on staff and on us. Because when you leave the maximum flexibility, if you start tightening that box, that takes away our flexibility, unless every time we do it, we say, well, we're going to exception for this and exception for that. And pretty soon everybody wants exception for everything. Right. I think it's on us to not miss that. And it's on staff to not miss that in the report. It should be a check mark, just like landscaping and lighting and pedestrian access, bicycle access. It should be one more of those check marks.
And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Is there a checklist, right, that we use as we're reviewing these things?
You have a standard template, right, Doug?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Let's make sure we get bicycle amenities or parking on that standard template.
Although the difference is, if I'm not, from my understanding anyway, the difference is that certainly as it relates to landscaping or the other issues you just mentioned that are on that checklist, we do have specific ordinances that are tied into that, whereas with bikes, we don't, right?
I think we do.
If I can jump in, it's attachment 2 has the bike park, the vehicle parking standards, landscaping, kind of in the table, based upon number of units for the parking standards. And then the landscaping is tied directly to the number of parking stalls as well. So I think initial thoughts here had been that it really goes into that attachment too, as kind of another item, another checkbox as a part of that certainly can be claused upon a redevelopment or a new development, for example, but that there be some sort of, even if it's loose standards or recommendations, something there that maybe uses a national standard for layout and, giving some deference certainly to the commission, but just having a sort of defined piece there, I personally think would be a good addition to that document, just so it's specifically there.
Something like bicycle parking shall be evaluated based on the proposed use. I mean, that gives us a lot of room to look at what the proposed use is, because, Christy, I know you said a big business. I would say a small business, the right small business in a redevelopment, I absolutely ask them to have bicycle parking. It might not be a lot, but they should have some.
Maybe proposed use and maybe even location.
Well, that would be part of it. Sure, proposed use and location. Sure, that makes sense. I held on to my chair, and I disagree with you on the one, because it could be a rainy, stormy day. It could be the middle of winter. We can't take away what that site, if there's a minimum number of parking that works for that site, and say, well, if you have 8 bike stalls, we'll take that away. Well, when it's storming out, when it's cold out, there's so many times where, as Rob said, there will be 0 bikes in those bike racks.
People still ride, but people do still ride.
Some people, but not a lot of people. There's a lot of us fair weather bicyclists. I'm one of them.
Well, I've been on one.
I can't see us saying we don't have to have as many car stalls if you're going to put in bike racks.
Even if it's one, Chris, and we have a nice general, then they could put in bike corral or something, something where there's just more space.
We can make them put in bike racks anyhow without giving up a stall.
I just think it's a win-win to reduce that one or two spots.
So anything else? Okay, that's on the bike. So what about the EV stations? Feedback on the EV stations.
Hey, Nancy, do you recall we just had a big discussion about EV stations, or Doug? And I'm trying to remember what meeting that was at. If that was at City Council, we were talking about in front of the City Center, and whether
we were talking about it in the context of the capital budget. And what we decided was, because there was some discussion initially of putting a couple of stations in the library, at the library. And we decided, I believe the mayor actually may have pulled it because it is the mayor's budget, and we're always paring back on capital requests. And I think that she, either it was suggested by the library and it was pared back, or I don't even know that it made the budget, but it was discussed, and what was decided was that we didn't feel like we needed to add any at this point, because there are 2 that are at the community center, and they're not tied up a lot. And we know that there's a good number of people in Monona who have electric cars that have just gone ahead and put their own charger at their own house. I mean, obviously right now, it's not like there's a lot of visitors to the city of Monona because we're in COVID. It's not like people are coming for park events or community center events or to be at the pool or to be at the library for that matter, since we have a lot of people from outside of Madison, from outside of Monona that use our library. So we felt like it would not be a prudent use of resources this year. But again, that's different than having EV stations if you're doing a new development, as in the riverfront, or for that matter, the building that's going up right now, in the riverfront. That's a lot of people there.
A lot of parking.
And a lot of parking spaces. It's hard for me to imagine. Yeah, Doug.
And just to kind of piggyback off that, I think definitely this goes for both of these items, but certainly the EV. I think this was seen as a very incremental suggestion, that this would be would only be triggered by the largest redevelopments, you know, some such as the riverfront, for example, you know, high 200 parking stalls, you know, to put in a couple EV stalls, I think would make sense. And the same would be something like a WPS, or, you know, if they're resurfacing, or if they're doing something like that where there's significant volume, something like that makes sense. But certainly, you know, in no way suggesting that a smaller site on Monona Drive, for example, or any of those be required. You know, I think this one in particular, it would be much more of an incremental suggestion than sort of across the board.
Right.
Maybe hotels.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Chris?
Couple things. I think it's a great effort, and I definitely think as a city we should walk the talk, and we should put a few of them in. I think asking a business to have a fueling facility for their customers is really out there. I think, you know, what is it? Maybe, is it 2% of the sales are electric vehicles? So to tell a business, to tell American Family that if they're going to resurface their parking lot, we've decided you should put in 12 EV stations. I think that's something American Family might do, Josh, but that, I think, is their decision. I think just because they're going to resurface their parking lot, we don't come in and say, put that in. On the recommendations, a couple of things, they say it should be the most convenient stall. I would be the opposite, because if somebody's using it, they're going to be there and plugged in for a long time. You sure wouldn't take the most convenient stall and have somebody sitting right in front of the front door to recharge their car. I think, as somebody here said, Doug, you might have said it, Nancy, you might have said it, but people in Monona are probably on short trips and they're recharging in their homes. So would I encourage the Current, for example, to do it? Yeah, we talked about it. We thought they were going to do it. We didn't require it, but they said, yeah, we're looking into that. We're probably going to have a few stations. And of course, that didn't come to fruition. And for a very large user, I think Christie's of a hotel, it might be really smart for a hotel. I mean, I think if you had it there might be some people that decide to stay there instead of somewhere else. I think we go really slow on this one, because again, you're asking somebody to have fueling facilities for people's cars at their business, and we're kind of crossing a little bit of a line when we do that. We surely wouldn't ask them to put in gas tanks to save them from going to PDQ or something, but they need to charge for such a long time. It's a different dynamic. It's just, I don't see the front of any business putting it in right there. I mean, it's saying, oh, we'll give you a perk, but then that stall's used for so long. I mean, how long does it take? 4 hours, 8 hours, sometimes overnight? I can see a business putting it in for their employees to use, but not so much their customers. I think it'd be great for employees to have a spot to charge overnight at hotels. So I think it's something we have to just put a lot of thought into, and what are we really trying to get at? And no offense to it, I don't want to do anything in Monona, bike stalls or charging stations, just because we get points for somebody. We need to do what's right for Monona, not to go get points for green tier. And I mean, no offense, I'm a green tier contractor, and I love it. And when I do the green masters, I can't always quite get enough points to be a master. So I totally understand the point thing, but we still have to look at it for what really works and what makes sense for Monona.
Right. But I guess, Chris, what I would say is that, as somebody who also chairs the sustainability committee, I'm maybe a little bit more in tune with how quickly the EV market's moving. And in fact, by 2025, there's going to be over 200 models, where now there's probably 30 models and they're all high-end vehicles like Teslas. You know, 70% of Ford's fleet is going to be electric vehicles. And so by 2025, so if we're not looking now for those new, like hotels or other businesses, we're not looking now to what the reality of the market's going to be, we could be doing a disservice to the businesses as well by not acknowledging that, because there are stations, for instance, all over the South right now. You know, there are chains of restaurants like Cracker Barrel, for instance, put in high-speed charging stations in every single one of their restaurants, because somebody can go in and eat and be recharged while they're eating. because there's high-speed charging stations that literally only take about an hour. So there's a lot more flexibility out there than I think people might, and a lot more coming down the pike in terms of EVs. So
Do you know offhand how much it costs to put in that quick charge thing versus a regular one? I have no idea. What we'd be asking somebody to do.
yeah, I don't know what the latest is, because part of it is obviously the utilities are different in terms of that charging too. In terms of whether they're putting in the stations, and then the consumer is being charged for that charge in much the same way that the consumers charge for the B-cycle if they take a B-cycle out, or whether the station is being put in by the municipality, or by the business. But I'm not sure. Josh, do you know anything more about that?
I don't know about the quick charges, but we've been installing charge point stations at American Family, and it all depends on how close your infrastructure is. A lot of the investment is tied up in extending infrastructure out to support the station. But on average, I don't know, we're probably spending $12,000 to $14,000 per station to get them installed.
And those are what, the level 1, level 2?
That's a level 2 charger.
Okay. So the what were you talking about, Nancy? Is that the level 3 where you can charge in a half hour or hour?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, requiring one of the costs of putting in charging stations after construction, like trying to retrofit your facility to do that, it can be a lot more expensive, which is why, at least from a cost standpoint, if a development is going to put them in, it makes sense to do it when they're new and doing all of their construction.
I think a lot of places they're actually putting in the conduit, and that's what you're talking about. Just get the conduit in there, because you can always pull the wires and do the other things. But if you don't put the conduit in, now you're tearing up your parking lot, you're tearing up your sidewalks, your landscaping. So if we're talking about having the conduits laid, we're not asking a lot for that, to lay conduits and have a plan for where this might be in the future.
Right.
That's a relatively small cost. The station itself could get to be a lot.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to say. Having it EV ready is, this is a forward thinking, thing we're talking about. And as a simple step, requiring that EV ready so that they identify, that they're going to have conduit runs to adequate sources, power sources, and that whatever equipment is needed can be installed and maintain AD accessible routes, have those parking spots identified to accommodate things so they don't have a chain reaction of existing infrastructure that's already been built.
Right.
Josh, how much use do you get on yours? Do you have any figures yet on how many of your employees are using them?
It depends on the market, Chris. We've maxed out usage at national headquarters. So I think at national headquarters, we've got a total of probably 10 all in. And just like you mentioned, we subsidize the power. So, we provide it to the employees, and we've had a problem with people camping out in the parking spot all day. So we've got a program where we have an EV community where they go out and encourage each other to move their vehicles every 4 hours. So that's definitely one component, that's why we moved to the charge point stations, so that we can control how long they pull power. We can turn them off after a certain period of time. But we're looking at expanding it out to the rest of our portfolio and some of the other states, because there is demand, but it all depends on the market. Like our Phoenix and our Denver facilities, high demand. Minneapolis, you would have assumed, not so much, at least not today.
Anybody else on the EV stations?
I have a question that's related, but slightly unrelated.
Okay.
Just thinking about, well, first of all, I like the EV ready concept a lot. But, I was looking through some of the different ordinances you had, and also how there were some requirement that as home improvements are made, that there's, the thought about, or well, not necessarily home improvements, but when new houses are being built, making sure that the garage has the appropriate power source to power one of these vehicles in the future, just assuming that there's going to be growing interest over time. But it just made me wonder about our Renew Monona program. And it says, and I just pulled up the flyer again to look, and it doesn't specifically state it, but does our city, would our city allow that loan program be used if somebody was redoing their garage or building a new garage? Would they be able to use the loan to do something like this?
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
To my knowledge, we certainly haven't had anything come through. There was a recent addition when this program was refunded last year for renewable energy to be included. So that has included, we've had applications come through that have used things for solar installations. I'm not sure if it could be tied, the garage may well be eligible anyway on its own, but the funding for, the couple thousand or whatever it would be for the electrical work, the infrastructure to go in, it would be a question of the CDA at the time of application. But I think you can make the case that it is a renewable, that there is a renewable component to it, particularly if, and I believe that this is the case in some states, the local energy companies are also sort of assisting with some of that, with the cabling or with the products and things as well. So I think there definitely could be opportunities there. Yet to see it, but it could work.
Okay. Sorry. Thanks for indulging me with that question.
Great comment. I like that.
Yeah.
Thinking.
Are there any other comments on the EV stations? Yes, Chris.
Sorry, Josh, keep picking on you. How many stalls do you have overall at national headquarters? So you've got 10 stations in now. So is that?
That's a good question. I mean, we've got 3 parking structures with, well, A and B are 3 stories. I think building C is 6. So, I mean, we've more than 1,000.
Right.
We have more than 3,000 employees that work out of that facility.
Okay. So you're looking at somewhere around 1% of your, something less than 1% of your available stalls.
Right.
And it's being used a lot. Are you way under? Or are you thinking to put more in?
We are thinking about putting more in. Yeah, we continue to monitor it and we continue to make investment over time. However, with this pandemic, everything's in question.
Sure. You don't know how many employees you have coming back or working from home. I'm just asking because when we're looking at, what size business and how many, is it 1 per 200 stalls or 1 per 150 stalls, just to try to get a sense for it.
Yeah, good question.
I think it certainly can be something we look at for a major user like that. And I think we certainly can get something going where we think about letting any major redevelopment at least have conduit. And I don't think that's asking a lot to put the conduit in for future. And one of your first staff recommendations is to make sure electric vehicle charging stations are considered a permitted use in all zoning districts. That might be something we need to do, but if there's confusion on it, if they say, is it even a permitted use? I don't think anybody disagree that a charging station should be a permitted use. I think we have to be careful. And I don't even know. I don't think they have a lot of sound, do they? If somebody had a charging station outside their garage, is there a lot of sound or noise or anything from it? Or is it? No. Okay. So as far as one of your recommendations, that's one that probably something we should do sooner rather than later, is to make it clear that they are permitted uses.
Great. Anything else? I'm certainly happy to call the folks at WPS and find out how many they have. I'm sure they do. As our largest business, I'm sure they already have charging stations. I mean, they're a leader on the sustainability front in many ways as a business, and I'd be curious. As a basis of comparison, I'd be curious to know how many they have and how, whether it's been successful, or whether or not, for that matter, we have other businesses that we might not be aware of that have been more recent builds. Whether, I don't know if the vet clinic or other people, probably not, but I mean, I'd be curious to know if other businesses have considered it. But certainly with WPS, it would make more sense. I can call and find out, or email and find out. Anything else?
I have one last question. Is it common for businesses to monetize those stations? No.
I'm not sure. I think a lot of the publicly available ones probably are monetized, and it seemed like a pretty common inclusion in some, I guess maybe not common, but like I saw quite a few ordinances that included a line saying that the owner of the charging station is allowed to charge a fee for use of the station. But I'm not sure if WPS had one, if they were subsidizing the cost for their employees, if it's not a publicly available charging station. I can definitely look into that and see.
It seems like a reason, if we were encouraging businesses to do it, I think it seems like it would be a reasonable thing to allow them to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be hard not to let them do that, to tell them they've got to invest
Yeah.
dollars in something, but you're doing it for free for the public. I think that'd be very tough for us to do.
Yep, Brian.
Well, that brings up a whole nother kind of interesting point. Would we allow other businesses to pay for and put them in a different location and basically run a business out of it? So for example, if I went to the Current and said, you know what, I want to invest and put 10 charging stations in, and I want to now charge because they're the public stalls. So are we going to allow that?
Yes, I'm spinning up a new business. I'm spinning up an LLC. Good idea, Brian.
Yeah.
So when Tracesta was being built and I was at MESPA, I had gotten contacted by a company that was trying to get EV stations put all around Monona. And so I had connected them with Tracesta. And so they said they would do that at no cost for Tracesta. So they put in that EV station, I believe, at Tracesta for no cost. I don't know what other, financial structure there is, but that is a thing.
So Brian, sounds like somebody's already ahead of you. It's hard to believe, I know, but.
Yeah, it reminds me of our rec credits for the solar panels on City Hall.
Right. Same. Yep. I've had companies contact us about finding rooftops. Yeah.
Anybody else on the EVs? Alyssa, fantastic work. Keep it coming. Really appreciate it. These are all really important conversations for us to be having. If we're going to walk the walk as it relates to sustainability, as you've heard me say, we need to be looking at all the different angles, right? So, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks to all of you for the feedback. It's really helpful because I can look at a million things online, but actually hearing discussion about it and getting everyone else's opinions is, it's super helpful for me.
Okay. Great. Thank you everybody for your feedback. Reports from staff and commission members.
Thank you. In terms of upcoming items, we do have the Clear Spring Court rezoning request for October 26th. The notice has been sent for that. That did come through last meeting for kind of the pre-hearing, but that was the first available meeting date. And aside from that, the only other thing, I have been getting calls about the Shopco site, or the former Shopco site. I would expect probably before the end of the year that some sort of pre-hearing may well take place. I'm encouraging interested applicants to kind of come for a workshop, come for a pre-hearing with the commission to sort of discuss the concepts and their thoughts. So there's one that seems to be inching forward with the possibility of coming through for a workshop. So I will keep the commission posted about that, of course.
Great. Thank you. Any other? Yes, Brian.
Yeah, Doug, to follow up on that, if I remember right, the Shopco site we've gone through now I can't think of the word, the subdivision of the
survey.
And is the applicant or the potential applicant that you've been working with, is it for the full site or a smaller parcel within it?
It has definitely been discussed every time I've had the call. Is really the CSM. It has since lapsed again. I know it's come through twice and hasn't been fully executed. But thinking about if it is to be maybe a lower intensity use in the main box in the main store, to think about the out parcels as well. So the possibility of the CSM of maybe subdividing for retail or some other use, that could be an opportunity. So definitely encouraging that. And I think that is the main reason to certainly come for the workshop to get some feedback on those concepts.
Looks like we lost Nancy.
Oh no, we did. Oh,
I just have one quick question. And I don't know if this is appropriate for the committee or commission or not. I've noticed that Gunderson's been holding services in their parking lot due to COVID. Friday afternoon, I was driving by and they were having an open casket service in the parking lot. And so I was a little startled, just caught off guard to see, a corpse in a casket driving by. Has anybody else seen that, heard that? Is that appropriate? I mean, can we ask them to put some screens up when they're hosting a service like that?
I have also seen that. It wasn't Friday. It was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I had a visitor who was coming to my house who saw that on their way and mentioned it. That was odd and unexpected.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was happening either.
It's a great question. Because my kids were in the car and they saw it. It was their first time seeing a body.
Right.
So it was a little like,
Yep.
Yeah. A screen is probably a really good idea. I mean, you would think the family would want privacy as well.
Right.
Yeah, it wouldn't take much to ask them to just put
No.
a screen. Yeah.
Well, Christy, you're with Nancy gone, you're the chair now, so maybe you should ask Doug to give him a call and see if they couldn't look into the little screen. We've had multiple comments now, so.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks
Yeah.
for bringing that up, Josh. That's really valid.
I definitely, more May or June of this year, I received a call from them asking about the tent structure, putting that up intermittently for services. But it was more, my impression, it was more of particularly with the heat at that time of year, and it was more of the gathering space for sort of a visitation or something. I wasn't under the impression that the service would be outside, so definitely I can follow up with that.
Great. I mean, it's kind of interesting timing because it's probably starting to wind down because it's starting to get cold out, but good to be prepared for next year if we're still in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm trying to get back to page 1 on the agenda. Is there anything else on the agenda, Doug, or that's it, I think, isn't it?
That would be it, as long if there's no more comments or requests of staff.
Anyone have anything else for Doug to consider? Okay. All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll move
Doug,
adjournment.
I'll fight for it. All right. There we go. How about a second? Come on. Going once. Going twice.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Hi. Good
right.
job, Christy.
All right.
Happy Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yep. Bye, everyone.